Welcome back to Her Birth, Her Story, where we share real birth experiences. I'm Brooke, your host, and on today's episode, we are sitting down with Jenna, who is a mom to 5 precious kids, and she has taken a very unique walk into motherhood. After 6 miscarriages, her and her husband decided to adopt, and they adopted their firstborn, and after they adopted their firstborn, she was able to get pregnant naturally after making some health swaps and was able to birth 4 biological babies. She had a hospital birth and then also have experienced some home births, and each one of her babies has brought a unique experience and just a new thing that the Lord has taught her during this time. She answers some questions for us and just brings us so much wisdom and knowledge. And she's also a birth photographer in the Memphis, Tennessee area. And she just loves the birth work that she does. So please join me in holding space for Jenna and her story. Hey, Jenna, thanks for coming on Her Birth, Her Story. Can you go ahead and start by introducing yourself to us?
Yeah, thanks so much for having me. I'm Jenna. I live in Tennessee, right outside of Memphis. I'm married to my husband of 11 years, and we have 5 kids. I'm a Christian. We're very active in our church, and I'm a photographer, but I specialize in birth photography.
That is amazing. I love that. And before we dive into your birth stories, because I'm really excited to get into those because you have such a unique journey into motherhood too. But can you take us back to the beginning of your motherhood journey? What'd that look like for you?
My motherhood journey. So soon after my husband and I got married, it was less than a year, we wanted to start trying. We knew we wanted kids pretty soon. And so when we started trying, we got pregnant very quickly and then soon after lost that baby. And we kind of thought the same thing that anyone else would think when they, have a miscarriage. Like we're very sad, but we'll just try again. And so we tried again and we had another miscarriage, and we tried again and we had another miscarriage. And at that point, the doctor we were with at the time, said, well, let's kind of start seeing if we can figure some stuff out. When we had our 4th miscarriage, this was about a year into trying, we ended up having some genetic testing done, which for the most part came back inconclusive. But at that point, we just decided that, we knew we wanted to adopt. And so we thought maybe this is the Lord leading us down that path.
Yeah.
So we weren't done trying for biological kids, and we kind of assumed our adoption journey would begin after biological kids, but we were like, okay, maybe this is what we should do. That next year, we started our adoption journey, and over that time, we had 2 more losses. And we also saw like a fertility specialist who basically told us, you won't have biological children without IVF. And so that was not the route we wanted to take. And so we were very content just pursuing adoption. So started our adoption journey, and over that year, we went through the process. We did have one disruption, which means that we were planning to adopt, and her mom chose to parent, which is always a good thing, but it was also very hard. And then towards the end of that year, we got the call about our son.
Wow. That is so amazing. So, can you walk us through just like how that adoption came about and just what you were feeling mentally, emotionally, or spiritually during that time?
It was very exciting because it felt a lot more hopeful than what we were going through with trying for biological children. But it was also really hard
Yeah.
and obviously expensive, and but it was obviously a really trying time for like my husband and I, for our marriage, for our faith, because it just felt so confusing, especially being at a time where you're watching like so many of your friends like get pregnant and have babies and all these things. It was very lonely.
Mhm.
And it was really a time where I really felt like I had to lean on the Lord and lean on my husband. And that was definitely a time where my husband was my rock, because I just wasn't in a place to be okay.
Yeah.
And it was an extremely growing time, though. And then obviously coming through it, meeting our son and bringing him home was just a surreal experience.
So, would you like to kind of just like walk us through your adoption story as well and just kind of touch on, like you had said, you had never experienced love at first sight. So, what did that feel like as well?
So there is in studies done that show that like adoptive parents have a similar hormonal shift, the same as like you would when you have a biological child. And when we had just gone through our disruption, and so we thought we were going to get a baby, and then we didn't. And then a few days later, we got a call about our son who was already born. And so it all happened like that baby and him were born a few days apart.
Wow.
So it all happened very, very quickly. And so getting that call, it was very exciting. It was very, there was also that like fear of like experiencing that loss again. And so we did go into it kind of guarded, but also very hopeful. And it was the next day that, we called our basically who would be like our social worker back and said, yes, we do, want to pursue this. And then we went and we met him. And it was like the first time I met him, I knew like that's my baby.
Oh,
And I just had this overwhelming feeling of love that I had never experienced before. And like, of course, now looking back, I'm like, it was just oxytocin, like crazy,
yeah.
but it was just so beyond incredible. And it was something that I didn't experience again. Like, I've never experienced that again with any of my other children.
Yeah. Wow, that's amazing. What did God teach you about motherhood before you ever even gave birth?
I would say that everything that any mom, any first time mom would be learning, I learned outside of like physical things. There's obviously, I didn't give birth. My body didn't have to heal, but I still had to wake up through the night.
Yeah.
I still had to learn how to stretch.
Yeah.
That first time mom stretch it's challenging because you realize how selfish you are and how selfish you no longer get to be,
Yeah.
And so it was definitely that just learning how to be his mom. But it was also, I think, something after going through loss and going through, what we went through, there was just an immense amount of joy in motherhood, um, that a lot of things was just like, whatever. Like, I don't even care. I just love this so much.
So now I want to get into your first biological birth. So you can go ahead and just kind of maybe give us an overview over that birth.
Okay. So to jump back just a little bit, I had 6 of my miscarriages before my son, and then 1 right after him. And at that point, we had decided we kind of done trying for biological children. We were very, very content. We wanted to adopt again. So, but my cycles were so messed up
Mm.
that we unintentionally got pregnant again. Now, between the time of our son coming home and getting pregnant with her, which was about when he was around 6 months old, I went through a really big lifestyle change. The point of the lifestyle change was really just because I had a baby and I had to take care of him and I wanted to be our home and our life to be as healthy for him as possible. But what I didn't know and what I didn't realize was how it was affecting my body in a good way.
Mm.
So without getting into all of that health stuff, I'll just say that I felt like my body was finally able to carry a baby. So when I got pregnant with her, I was not excited. I wouldn't say upset, but I just was tired. I was really tired. And then I started bleeding a few weeks in, and I went to my doctor because we were going on a trip. I had stuff to do. And for some reason, I wasn't miscarrying. I was just bleeding. And I was like, I don't know why my body's not really going into the process, but I want help to make it do that so that I'm, whatever. He did a scan and I was 7 weeks along at the time and she was there and her heartbeat was there
Oh.
and she looked good. And I was like, okay. I didn't really know what to think. The bleeding was from hematoma, which is actually really common. I think it's in about 30% of pregnancies, but this one was enough that it was causing pretty heavy bleeding. And so he was like, just be cautious, be restful, and be hopeful.
Yeah.
And so, but I was not hopeful. I was very much, I know this is going to end, but I'm going to enjoy this baby while I have
Yeah.
them. And so went on, continued the pregnancy. Everything actually was fine, which was shocking. And it was around halfway through my pregnancy, it finally like settled. I'm probably going to have this baby and I probably need to get ready for it. And that was very exciting because I loved birth.
Yeah.
I had photographed my first birth right before our son came home. And so I was like, oh, like I'll get to experience that.
Wow.
And I went straight into educating myself. I was so excited to give birth. I was like, I would say that for a first time mom who had not really been able to focus on the thought of birth, I really did educate myself as best as I could. If I could go back and do one thing different, I would have hired a doula, but that wasn't even on my radar at the time.
Yeah.
I loved the idea of having my baby at home, but I did not trust my body. So I planned a hospital birth, but I wanted all the things. I didn't want to be induced. I wanted to do it unmedicated. And so my doctor was very, very supportive, but he's still an OB. And in the state of Tennessee, you are required to induce at 42. So, I never dilated enough to have a sweep. I didn't even know a lot of like natural induction options. So when I hit, 41 and something, my doctor was like, okay, like we need to schedule your inductions. Long story short, I ended up having an induction. I was induced as best as I could be. So I was given Cervidil. And then from there, once I was dilated enough, he broke my water.
Yeah.
Would not do that now, but
Yeah.
7 years ago I did.
Yeah.
And his goal was to try to do it without more medication.
Yeah.
And so when my contractions started, they started off at 2 minutes apart, like within an hour of having the Cervidil. And they never stopped being close together.
Wow.
Pretty quickly into my labor, it started getting intense. And it was a really hard labor. So all in all, it was 26 hours. And at about the 20 something hour mark, what I now know feels like transition I had been in for many, many, many hours.
Wow.
But when they would check me, I was 5 to 6. And of course, they were like, you are not dilated, do not push, all the things. And I was having bearing down contractions. And my doctor came in and he said, at risk of having a C-section, I think that you need to get an epidural, let us up your pit, and go ahead and have this baby.
Yeah.
Well, I would 100% rather have an epidural than a cesarean.
Yeah.
So I said yes. Well, he kind of had to tell my husband, who had to explain it to me because I was like way too far gone to like hear anything. So anyways, I got the epidural. It was incredible. Not gonna lie, the best choice I made for that birth was to end my suffering because I was no longer laboring. It was not normal. It was suffering.
Yeah.
And I think a large part of that was fighting my feelings of needing to push.
Yeah.
So got the epidural. An hour later, I was complete. An hour later, I had her. For one, I was exhausted. So it was hard in that sense. But also having her, it kind of felt like the heavens opened up and the angels were singing. And it was like just a very like high experience, right? And I got them to turn off my epidural when I started pushing. So I felt like I got to experience, not fully, because I think there's a misconception that sometimes if your epidural doesn't work right, that it's not doing anything. And it was doing something for sure, but I got to feel more than I would have if I had them leave it on. And I had her and it was incredible and it was very emotional after going through the physical aspect of it. And then, of course, through that labor, my husband was there, and then my sister, who I'm really, really close to. And honestly, I feel like after that, they were more traumatized than I was.
Yeah.
To this day, they're probably still more traumatized than me over that birth. But
Yeah.
yeah, then I have my baby.
Yeah, that's awesome. And I think that too, I think it's very important to say that sometimes too the epidural actually does help you. Just like what you said. Like you needed that to get out of the suffering of like you're trying to get through it but your body wasn't really dilating and progressing as much as you really needed it to get out of that suffering, but that epidural helped take some of that off so that your body could just relax a little bit so that then you could progress more. And I think that's really important to say as well, that not that if you get an epidural that then you're going to progress so quickly, or the opposite of if you don't get an epidural you're going to progress so quickly. Sometimes you have to just kind of read the situation and do what you feel is best at that time. So I'm glad that
Yes.
you were able to do that. And it's also cool that you are able to turn the epidural off, which I know sometimes with that too, like you said, like sometimes it doesn't completely go away or whatever. But I also think that that is cool, that that's something that you can advocate for as well. So,
Yes.
but you had said that this first birth was long and you got induced and it was just pretty traumatic and deeply emotional because this was your rainbow baby. But what stands out most to you when you look back at this experience as a whole?
My experience having her was incredibly humbling because I think that sometimes, especially as a first time mom or any mom, we set expectations of our births and even our babies. And when expectations are not met, we are very disappointed.
Yeah.
And I think that after going through so many hard things leading up to having her and finally getting to experience a birth, I had it in my head subconsciously that I deserved the birth that I wanted.
Mm.
And we know that we don't deserve
Yeah.
anything. By the grace of God, He gives us good things.
Yes.
But it was the birth I needed because it was the catalyst for what my next birth was and what my career path was and loving birth work. Because after her birth, I became so passionate about women having good birth experiences. And looking back, I really wish that I would have set my expectations in a realistic place, especially considering that I was choosing to have a hospital birth. Not to say that you can't have a really, really good hospital experience, but I wanted a home birth experience at the hospital.
Yeah.
And it was really hard to deal with those emotions after the fact. Even though if you look at my birth, it wasn't a terrible birth. It was really hard, but hard is not bad. But I felt really disappointed in it. And then I struggled a lot postpartum, partially because of my birth.
Wow. So then how did this birth experience impact the way that you approached your next?
In every way. It was from the moment I left the hospital, I told my husband, I'm never going back to the hospital to have a baby.
Yeah.
And he was like, yeah,
Wow.
agreed.
Good. At least he was on the same page too. Because a lot of times that's like the big thing is that the mom is all gung ho for it. And then the dad is the one that's very like skeptical.
Yeah, I think for one, I did end up having a vaginal birth with very little complications. And I think that helped. Also, I think he was probably felt like anything was better than that.
Yeah.
He trusted me. And I also think, not to say that he didn't have reservations, but once we met with who we chose for our midwife, that changed so much because I love her so much.
Yeah.
But she answered all of our questions. She gave us so much peace and so much confidence in knowing that if anything did go wrong, any typical thing that could go wrong did go wrong, that she was very equipped to deal with that. And I think that's what he needed going into this next birth.
Yeah.
And I was also so confident. I was like, I am doing everything.
Yeah.
And I did. I was doing the exercises, I was taking the supplements, I was doing the mental work to prepare for having her. And she was our first that we that was a surprise. We didn't find out what she was.
Oh,
But so at the time, I was just preparing for my baby, whoever they
yeah.
were. And I just feel like the prep that I did before having her made so much difference, but also choosing the place that felt right for me, which was being at
Yeah.
home.
Yeah. No, that I could not agree more with that. Now I want to jump into your second birth, your third child, their story. So go ahead and set up the story. If you have any background stuff beforehand, I'm just going to let you tell it uninterrupted.
So, like I said, with her, I did so much prep before having her, and I felt so ready. After my first birth, I've had positional issues with my babies. And so with her, I could feel her on one of my hips all the time. And as I was coming towards the end of my pregnancy, I was having my husband do the rebozo. So he would, I would get on all fours. I'd put I used a ring
Yeah.
sling, put it around my belly, and he would take it, pull my belly up, and shake. And when I was coming up to 40 weeks, he did that, and I felt her come off my hip.
Mm.
And it was soon after that that I went into labor with
Oh.
her. So it was like a day or two after that that I had some bloody show. And I woke up around 3 a.m. having contractions, but they were very mild, very far apart. I got up out of bed. I went and laid down on the couch, went back to sleep. Well, when my husband got up for work, he at the time was working pretty close to where we live. We live pretty rurally. So he works in Memphis, which is about an hour drive now. But at the time he was working like 15 minutes away. So I was like, go ahead and go to work. I feel fine. And so I got up, was doing normal things. I did want to go ahead and send my toddlers over to my mom because I just wanted to feel like I could
Yeah.
relax. My husband decided around 10, like, I'm going to go ahead and come home. I know you say you're fine, but I'm going to go ahead and come home, which ended up being one of my favorite times of that labor because, even though I just felt really, really happy. I was so excited to be in labor. I was so excited to meet my baby. And I just felt so ready for every contraction. And at the time, they were really, really mild still, so I could breathe through them. And we ate lunch, and we just spent time together, and it was very sweet. We ended up going for a walk, and of course, I'm texting my midwife this whole time. Well, we end up going for a walk, and while we're walking, I just kind of felt her drop.
Mm.
And I felt like I needed to go to the bathroom.
Oh,
And
yeah.
I just, kind of started feeling like a little something. Well, my husband called my midwife and she was like, do not let her go to the bathroom. And I was like, look, I actually know that I need to go to the bathroom. So I'm going to go to the bathroom.
Yeah.
But if it's something more, I'll let you know. She went ahead and got ready to come out. We called everyone. We're like, go ahead, everyone go ahead and head this way. So by the time everyone got here, spoiler alert, I did just have to go to the bathroom. The baby did not fall out. So everyone got here. It was around, I would say, like between 1 and 1:30. And after everyone got here is when I really started to feel a lot more active, like really coming into active labor. I don't know how far apart they were at the time, but they were at least 5 minutes apart, probably closer. And I started feeling a little bit pushy.
Mm.
And that was the first time I felt nervous because when I started feeling like that with my first labor, I was told, you're only 5, don't push.
Yeah.
So I asked my midwife to check me and because I wanted to know where I was at feeling this way. And she checked me and I was a 5.
Mm.
And I was like, no, like, is this happening again? But the difference was she did not tell me, don't push. No one was, discouraging me. I just got to do exactly what my body was telling me to do. And at that point, I started bearing down with each contraction, and then I went into transition. And so it was about 30 minutes of transition from the point she checked me and I was a 5 until I said, like, I want to get in the water. And at this point, like, I'm very, very active laborer.
Okay.
I do a lot of squatting. I do a lot of groaning. I move a lot. Like, I'm not just to sit there and take it. And I felt like that really helped her labor feel less painful because I was just doing what felt
Yeah.
right. and moving the way that felt right. And it kept me from going into just focusing on the pain. I could focus on, experiencing it the way I wanted to. So when I told my midwife I really want to get in the water, she was like kind of nervous, thinking, I just checked her. She was a 5, and she was like, can I check you? And I said, yes. And she didn't really even have to check me because she barely felt and her head was right there.
Yeah.
So I hop in the tub and I felt I went from transition to pushing phase, which for me feels very distinct. So I no longer felt intense. It just felt very like calm. And then I would feel like I needed to push and I would push. And the only part of my labor with her that I would have said felt even remotely painful was transition. So for about 30 minutes. So all in all, her labor was 12 hours. So that means like 11 and a half hours I would have said was painless.
Wow.
So I get in the tub, I'm pushing, I get her head, like, crowning, and I asked my husband, "Do you wanna feel her head?" And so he feels her head, and he's like, "Wow," and my midwife's like, "There's a head?" It was it all that phase was very, like, quiet and calm and peaceful and beautiful and wonderful and everything you would ever want in a birth, and a few more pushes and she was out.
Wow.
And my midwife and I brought her up to my chest and she transitioned so well and she was perfect and 8.5 pounds
Wow.
of just plump sweetness. And it was in the afternoon, so the light was coming through the window and it was golden, it was glorious, and it was just incredible. And it was such a redemptive birth from what my first was because could not have asked for a better experience.
Yeah. No, that is so good. And I am praise God that you got like that experience too, especially because of how your first one was. And it can just obviously feel very overwhelming. Birth in general is just very intense. And just to have that redemption story too is just amazing. So you had described it as almost painless besides just transition. What do you think contributed to that kind of experience?
I think the main thing was prep, like mental prep.
Mm.
And I think another thing was the length of my labor was kind of the perfect length. So, I said my labor was 12 hours, but transition and pushing was an hour.
Wow.
So I had so much early labor. I felt like my body had so much time to get so much oxytocin and really just get into that birth high that it helped a lot. But I do think the main thing is mental prep. And she was in a good position when it was came time to push.
Yeah, that definitely makes a huge difference too. So you said too that this birth showed you that the Lord truly cares. What moment made that real for you?
Throughout my pregnancy, I prayed specific prayers. And some of those prayers was I really wanted it to be like less
Yeah.
painful. I didn't ask for a painless birth, but I said less painful. And the Lord granted me that beyond what I could have
Yeah.
imagined. And then another big prayer was that I would be half the time.
Mm.
And it was almost exactly half the
Wow.
time. And I sometimes think that for many reasons, we don't want to ask for specific things. And sometimes it feels like birth is not as important in the grand scheme of things, right? It's just one blip of having that child. And so we feel like we shouldn't ask. And that experience really made me realize like how much the Lord cares for me,
Yeah.
cares for the desires of my heart and granted me that good thing and how that affected like my motherhood after that.
Yeah. No, that's really, really powerful. So now I'm going to let you just kind of share the overview of your next birth.
So my next birth, which again, we didn't find out the gender of him either, but we ended up having a boy. My oldest really wanted a brother after two sisters. And so the whole pregnancy, I'm like thinking, I did a lot of prep, but not as much as I did with the one before, which I think is partially circumstantial. I already had 3 kids, already done it a couple times. I felt a lot more confident. But coming into his birth, I had totally convinced myself that I was gonna have him
Mm.
early. Like, there's no way I'm gonna go to 40 weeks. I didn't go quite to 40. I went 39 and 6 with the one before him, so I thought I'll have him before that because he was so low and, no, no. So that 40 weeks passed. We were coming up to 41. I really didn't want to do any type of induction method, and so I'm just like doing all the things that you're supposed to do. And a big problem with him was I could tell it was positional.
Mm.
So I was doing a lot of the mile circuit and, like a lot of walking and a lot of, different positions. I was going to pelvic floor therapist to help me out and all the things. And my midwife had told me, like, I really think it would help if you had a sweep. And I was 41 and 2. So the night before, I just really did not wanna do it. I was unsure of whether I was actually going to do it, and hopefully this is not TMI, but I got my husband to do his husbandly duties, and I was like, "Make this sweep unnecessary." The next morning, I woke up at 4 AM in labor, and my midwife jokes, she's like, "I know you did not wanna come in for that sweep." And so I woke up at 4 AM in labor, and I was feeling pretty good, like, very excited, finally in labor. But it was progressing a lot quicker than my previous birth, and so when I started feeling about the same as I would, before, I started coming into active labor, like, within, like, an hour or so of waking up, and I was standing in the bathroom, and my water broke, and I went and stood in the tub, and I was like, "This is unfortunate," because I looked down and it was like a yellowish green, which let me know that there was meconium. And so, one thing that made me feel okay was I could tell my labor was progressing pretty
Yeah.
quickly. My husband was on the phone with my midwife when my water broke, and I was like, "Hey, tell her my water broke and there's meconium." And so she gave me the option if I wanted to transfer, and I was like, "No." And she was like, "Okay, I'm coming."
Yeah.
So her and her assistants headed this way. I did start to feel a little bit fearful with there being meconium, but because it was light in color and because my labor was progressing quickly, this was not my first, I felt pretty confident to stay
Yeah.
home. So everyone got here. They wanted to blow up the birth pool. I was like, probably one of the birth pool wasn't like really wanting to be in the water, but my midwife said, I really think you should be in water since there's meconium. It can help keep them from aspirating as they're coming
Mm.
out because they won't breathe until they come out of the water. So they blow up the birth pool. I'm laboring, and I'm just like, something does not feel right. He is not coming. Oh, at the time, I didn't know it was he, but it's like this baby is not coming down. Um, and I feel like I'm pushy and I'm, working through it, and it just does not feel the way that it should feel. I got into transition, and I got in the tub and started pushing, and again, it just felt like every contraction was way more painful. Baby was not progressing down the way that I had experienced before. And so my midwife did end up helping. So as he's coming, she's like pulling and helping me get him out because I'm pushing with all my might. And I'm like, this baby, his heart tones have started to drop a little
Mm.
bit. And she was like, okay, let's get this baby
Yeah.
out. Um, and so after about 15 minutes of like really, really, really hard pushing and her helping, he finally came out. I think that he wasn't in a good position, but he was also had a very long cord and it was around his neck, around his shoulders, around his back.
Wow.
It was wrapped up around him 3 or 4 times. And so I think that that was kind of holding him up.
Gotcha.
After having him, I was like, whew, oh my goodness, I'm so happy he is here and that is done.
Yeah.
Wow. And all in all, that was 4 hours.
Wow. That is amazing. You had said that this one was harder. You just still describe it as empowering. What gave you that strength in that moment?
Felt like I prayed more through this labor and birth than any of my others. I just felt like I was not gonna do this. The Lord had to help me get this baby out because he was just not easily coming
Yeah.
out. And so I really felt I loved it still. I loved the experience still, but I did have to really process how much harder it was after the fact. So even in my postpartum, it felt like I had to really like lean on the Lord and pray. And there's a Spurgeon quote that I think of every time I think of his birth, that is anything that makes us pray is good.
Mm.
I totally butchered that quote, but that's essentially the quote.
Yeah.
And that's how I felt about his birth. Like it was hard, but it was unnecessary hard.
Yeah, and you'd said that this birth was humbling and transformative. What really changed in you after this experience?
Every birth, especially coming from a birth worker perspective, every birth has taught me something. And I think in this birth, I really, again, I was humbled because, you always think, oh, I had this great experience before. I must be some magical birther. And then you have your next experience and you're like, okay, never mind. No, I still need the Lord every time I need him. Yeah.
Yeah, no, for sure. I definitely feel that. I'm just gonna let you go ahead now and jump into your most recent birth, and you can just set the stage for that. I'm gonna let you go uninterrupted.
So prior to having her, we had gone through a experience. It wasn't exactly a disruption, but it was a hopeful experience where we thought we were maybe going to adopt a baby girl. And I had really been feeling like the Lord had another daughter for me.
Mm.
And so when that did not happen, was very sad, and then immediately after found out I was pregnant. And so even though we didn't find out the gender again, I really thought this is my daughter. So that pregnancy was the hardest pregnancy by far, not physically necessarily, but emotionally. We had a lot of really, really big personal things happen that really affected our family, like our emotional state. It also just felt like there were so many things that happened throughout the pregnancy, like some small things, some larger things. Like when I was 39 weeks pregnant, my 2-year-old swallowed a coin and it got stuck in his throat and he had to have it surgically removed.
Oh.
So it was just like things like that that happened nonstop.
Wow.
And it was just really, really emotionally taxing.
Yeah.
And I really wanted to have her before the new year, and she was due um, in December. Her due date was kind of mixed up because I had one, and then it was, kind of like, well, it was based on when I think I got pregnant versus when my cycle was. But essentially, she was due around Christmas, and I really wanted to have her in December, but knew that there was a possibility I could have her after the new year because if I went over 41,
Yeah.
there we are. So I prayed and hoped and just wanted to have her in December so bad, and went through all the things going over again. And this time I felt like my midwife really had to put up with me, bless her heart. I was so unsure of everything. I didn't have the capacity to prep the way I needed to. I did not have the capacity to think about, like, do I want a birth pool this time? I don't know. I just didn't know anything. I was like, I just want to have this baby. And this was also the first birth that I was scared to have. I felt very nervous about giving birth this time. And I think a lot of that came from how emotional our lives had been. And I felt like everything has been hard. Is this going to be hard too? Like, is there going to be a bad outcome? I just felt a lot of fear, even to the point where my mind was like, should I go into the hospital? Like, should I get an epidural? Like, it was very, very hard mentally. And I was not ready for that. And so I obviously knew like I would regret all of that. I was like, stop being crazy. Like, you're going to have this baby at
Yeah.
home. Calm down. But I, ended up going over, did this time ask my midwife. I asked her if she could like give me a sweep because I just was like, I want to have this baby. I was so over being pregnant. And she did do 2 sweeps, and New Year's came. And January 1st, around midnight, it was like 11, like 40 something. I was having some contractions, which wasn't abnormal because I always have prodromal labor. And I'd been having prodromal labor for probably like a month and a half. So it really wasn't surprising, but I was having contractions and they were pretty like, I noticed them. And I turned to my husband and I was like, watch me go into labor now. Like, at midnight. And I did.
What?
So I laid down and went to sleep, and I was asleep for a little while. And then I kind of woke up and was having contractions. And I was like, these are kind of intense, but I don't know if I'm just kind of being a baby. And so I started timing them, and they were 10 minutes apart. I timed one at 15 minutes apart. And I was like, this cannot be labor because these are so far apart. I kind of like drifted in and out of sleep, and around 2 something, I could not anymore. I could not lay down through them. I had to get up. I got up and went to the bathroom, and I just told my husband, I don't know. They're so far apart. At this point, they were still like 7 to 8 minutes apart. So I just felt so confused and unsure. And I was like, I texted my midwife and let her know. My text was, I think, something to the effect of, girl, I don't know, but I'm having contractions. And I was sitting on the toilet, and then I had one contraction that felt like really pushy. And I told my husband, okay, no, you got to call Kimberly, who is my midwife. And he calls her, and she immediately is like, I'm on my way. So she sends one of her assistants who lives like maybe 15 minutes from me. So she goes ahead and sends her. She calls the other assistant. Mind you, I've worked with her through this, that would have been my third birth. I've also worked with her in the birth world doing birth photography. And so I knew all these women and had a good relationship with all of them. So my husband calls my sister, he calls my mom. Everyone's like slowly kind of making their way over. Well, my sister comes over, and at this point I am fully in transition. My contractions were still kind of far apart, like 3 to 5 minutes apart, and I am in transition. And I feel very lucid, which is the first one that I felt that way. Like she got there, I set my camera up for her to take pictures, and I'm just like talking to her, and I just felt like so with it. But my contractions were so painful. Every time I had a contraction, they felt I remember I was standing at the end of my bed. I had a contraction. I was like, this is just too big. It's too big. And then my mom comes in, and I'm howling like a psychopath. And she's like, okay, this is happening. Like, wow. And so at this point, she starts recording, because that's what she always does at every birth. Like she records, which I love.
Yeah.
I love that I have a video of all my births, even if I didn't necessarily want to watch all of them right away. So she starts recording, and looking back, you can see like the huge transition from me being in transition to pushing. And so those last few transition contractions were the most intense thing I've ever felt in my entire life. And I wanted it to be over so bad. And then I got very calm and was in pushing. And my midwife is on the phone, on speakerphone. And at this point, I was crowning. And then one of the midwife assistants runs in right then as I'm like crowning. And, I call out crowning because when you are used to being at births, you like, I don't know, you just naturally call things out. And then the assistant comes in, and then baby's head was out, and she was like, head's born. And then the next push, I was on my knees on the floor. So the first time not having a, baby in the water, and the rest of her came out, and I said catch her. I mean, really just like guide her out onto the floor.
Yeah.
And I felt so relieved and so like in awe. Wow. Finally, she's here at 3:20 a.m. on New Year's Day.
Wow.
So her birth, all in all, was about 3.5 hours.
Wow.
But I felt like I had a third of the amount of contractions that I'd had like with previous births in that time frame.
Wow. That is amazing, and definitely a wild experience too. It sounds like, just from how quick it was. And and I think that just goes to show, like, just like looking at all of your births, that every single birth is unique. Every single situation is unique. And just because you experience one birth doesn't always equate that's how it's always going to go. And I think that that's important for moms to know, not to put fear into you or feel like, oh my gosh, there's always going to be something, but just to know that you can do all of the same things that you did before, but still get a different outcome because there's a lot of things that go hand in hand with that. But I kind of want to jump into talking a little bit about your support system because for me, I just think that support systems, who you have around you, are honestly one of the most crucial things in your birth experience. Whether you choose hospital, home birth, in a field, I don't really care. Wherever you choose to birth your baby, the people that you have around you can really make or break it for you. So I want to speak to each of the people that have really changed your experiences, starting kind of with your husband and just how did he support you and how did that change throughout all of your births?
So I am not the kind of person who wants physical
Mm.
touch when I'm in labor. And the only person who can touch me is my
Yeah.
husband. So sometimes I do want his
Yeah.
touch, but no one else's. And as someone who's like supported people in labor, I get how like funny that sounds, but I just ain't
Yeah.
me.
No.
So with him, he really felt lost in my first
Yeah.
labor. He felt like there was nothing he could do. We didn't have a doula. I didn't know how to tell him to support me beforehand. So we really went into that, and it was like him just watching me be miserable for, a whole
Yeah.
day. And it was definitely hard. And of course my sister was at that birth too, which I think for better or for worse played into when she had her first because she just watched me go through that,
Yeah.
But my sister's also my best friend. So it meant so much having her there. So my husband, the first, he was like, I don't know what to do. The second, we did a lot more prep. We did a lot more like, this is what I want you to do. And trying to set those expectations for him. Like, this is what I want from you. And working on like doing those touches. Like, this is what this feels like. This is what this looks like. And so when it came to my second, he was like totally ready. And even just to be there for like someone to make me laugh, like someone to, just be my
Yeah.
person. Um, because so much of labor is not, the heavy breathing, like someone like squeezing on you, like, a lot of times it's just being
Yeah.
there. And then for my last 2, obviously, they were a lot quicker, wanting some of his physical touch, but also just, like, him being there and feeling confident in me.
Yeah.
Like, he has said, especially, like, for her birth, I was so, not with it, and he is like, "Babe, like, you know what you're doing. Like, your body knows what it's doing. Like, you've done this." And just having someone be confident in me helped because I was not confident in
Yeah.
myself. So, yeah.
Yeah. No, that's really good. And then you had already talked about kind of your sister, just because she's your best friend, being there and your mom helping you like create space so that you can just really focus on birth and stuff, because obviously that's really intense. How did those two really support you through your births?
My sister just being an emotional support and just being like a positive person, especially in my last birth, because she was the only person here for a little bit, which I mean, mind you, it was very short amount of time that anyone was here,
Mm.
but just being like my person, having that safe person with me. And like I said, I don't like physical touch, but I appreciate like words of
Yeah.
encouragement. And even watching back my birth video, like I can hear her like, encouraging me, like, you're doing such a good job. Like I have 2 people who I'd say are my people, and that's my husband and my sister, and they were both there every single
That's
time.
awesome.
And then with my mom, I had reservations about her being there for my first
Yeah.
birth. And so uh, she was at the hospital, but not in the room. But I had told her, I'm like, well, if I have a home birth with my next, you can be there. And then I did, and I was like, okay, now I gotta live up to that. One thing about that, which was hard, is that she was really
Yeah.
nervous about home birth. And so I was like, well, come meet my midwife. So she came to an appointment with me and got to talk to my midwife and ask her questions. And yes, there were questions I could answer, but she needed to hear it from
Yeah.
her. And I think that helped a lot. And then after watching me have her at home, it was like, wow, that's so cool. Like, this is what it can be. And also letting my mom be that person who, like, I just trust her to be the person who, if she walks into my house and like something's a mess, like I know she'll like clean it up real quick because people are coming over. Like she'll make sure people are taken care of so that I don't have to think about people being taken care of, because it was important to me that if someone's coming into my home, that there's coffee there, there's snacks
Yep.
there, there's, if they need anything, if she did that for me
Wow.
and I needed her to do that for me. And then as my sister and I have continued having kids, it's become so normal, for all of us to just have our babies at home.
Yeah.
And it's been really, really sweet for her. Obviously, her growing and having children at a time that was very, very different, to watch her get to grow as well has been really, really
Yeah,
sweet.
no, and that is super special too. And I just think it's great that you actually took her to talk to your midwife so that she could just feel more confident in the choice. Because honestly, that's like a continuing theme of people who choose to do a home birth and their parents really aren't on board. It's like every time that they actually get to see the care that their child is receiving, they get to see the knowledge that midwives bring, then all of a sudden it's like they thought that home birthing was their decision, like that they chose for you because they're so gung ho in home birth and they love it because they can see the quality of care and just like, what your body can naturally do. And it really just changes too. And like your kids as well, like they'll not saying that they will have a home birth, but they'll just be more exposed to that to where it won't seem so crazy to have a home birth. And I just think that that is so crucial, especially for this next generation of kids.
I totally agree, especially when it comes to, not that everyone needs to have their kids at their home births. I did not have my kids at my first two. They were, at ages where I didn't like, it was easier for me to not
Oh,
have them
yeah.
there. It was really important to me to have them at her birth. And so I actually, like, when my mom came in, I was like, can you go get the kids? And so she brought them into my room. My toddler slept on the bed the whole time.
That's funny.
Like, he never woke up, which is
Yeah.
crazy. But the 3 big kids, they were there, they were watching, and they got to watch me have their baby sister and then watch the aftercare. And of course, being a birth photographer, working in birth work, they've watched my birth videos. They've seen me edit photos. They, know what blood looks like, but for them to get to see, like, this is what mommy talks about when we talk about a placenta. And my oldest, who he is 8, got to cut her
Oh
cord. And he still will randomly say, like, when you had her, I was so proud of you.
my gosh, that's gonna make me cry. Man, I love that because it just, especially as a boy too, because obviously a boy is not going to go through the birthing process and experience that, but their wife someday is. And now he is learning and watching how amazing women are being able to bring forth life, carry life, but also he's going to know how to support and that it's not weird to do that. And that, you know, as a spouse, you want to be there to support your wife, especially during this time and how precious life is and being able to cut the cord. Like, I don't know. I just think like applause to you for doing that because you're creating just a different vision of birth to your kids, especially with that and how it's not weird, it's not medical, it's actually something that's very empowering and awesome. So if a mom listening is walking through loss, fear, uncertainty in her birth journey, what would you want her to know?
Well, as a Christian, and I know that this might not feel like it applies to people who aren't, and even for people who are maybe in the hard time, it might feel really far, far away. But I think just knowing and trusting that the Lord is sovereign and he does work everything out for our good and for his glory. And just holding on to that, that no matter what the story is that he gives us, that it is in fact good. And that is the hope that we have in Christ, is just knowing that, like, we don't have to feel guilt or fear or like, what if this, what if I would have done this? What if I would have done that? And it's like, I have peace in knowing that like the Lord has worked out something good for me here through my birth stories.
Yeah. No, that's really, really powerful. Thank you for sharing that. So, what would you say to a woman who is walking through that unexplained infertility journey right now?
It's a big question because what does that mean? What does it mean? So spiritually, I would say that there is a lot of like trust and peace in knowing the Lord and knowing that there there is a journey and a place that he will meet you in
Mm,
that. Practically speaking, there is so many things that can be done. I know, like for me, finding out some things that I had going on health wise and even not even realizing it, but starting to address those things were what ultimately led me to being able to carry a baby when I was told I would never be able
yeah.
to. Now, does that mean that that would happen for everybody? No. If you adopt, does that mean that you'll be able to get pregnant? No. There is no promises in having children in this life, but I know that there are answers and it's not
Yeah.
hopeless and you are not alone. I think that that's the biggest thing is just knowing like you are not alone. You're not the first person to walk this path and you can look at, like look at stories like mine, like look at my children, look at, other people even who haven't come to the point of having children yet and are still on the wait, like there is purpose in that.
Mm,
And there are other people there with you.
yeah. That's really good. Thank you for sharing that. And you had mentioned it at the beginning of the episode, but you are a birth photographer and you are a certified doula, even though you don't offer those services out, correct?
Right.
And, I love that your journey into birth work started before you even had your own birth. What was it like witnessing the first birth that you photographed?
Well, I am forever grateful to this mom. Shout out Cece, love you. But so it was like right before she had her daughter, which was her second birth. And it was the birth that ruined all hospital births for me because it was amazing, right? Like I went in and witnessed her have her second in the hospital with a doctor who basically just like let her do her thing,
Wow.
right? And I came in while she was pushing and run over and like I'm snapping pictures and she has her and it was like this experience I had never seen before and it was
Yeah.
amazing. And then she looks up at me and smiles like, "You're here." And it changed, first of all, my view of birth because, like a lot of people, a lot of things I've learned about birth were very negative.
Hmm.
And so going in there and witnessing her unmedicated hospital birth was just mind blowing. And I was like, I've got to do that again.
Yeah, for sure. What value do you think having a birth photographer and or a doula can bring to one's birth, especially first time moms?
I don't think anyone regrets having a birth photographer, right? Like, how do you look back at those photos meeting your baby and think, I shouldn't have had these, like
Yeah.
you love them. They mean so much. Even if you're like, I never want anyone to see these, but I want to see them.
Yeah.
Like, I know for me, I know for like many of my clients, like, you like around their birthdays, like you go back and look at them and you
Yeah.
cry and it's very, very sweet. And so the benefit is just being able to remember and have that and also have that for them one day because they might not want to see them but they
Yeah.
might, and I know hearing adults now whose parents actually did take photos of births, which was not very common, the past few generations, they love
Yeah.
it. And then as for a doula, especially for a first time mom, I think we don't know what we don't know, and doula is there to help you with all the things you don't know. She helps set your expectations. She helps inform you because there's no way to know everything. Like, no doula is going to know everything, just like no doctor or no midwife knows everything, but she's going to know a lot more and being able to help inform you. And even in the moment, I have, like I said, I don't work actively as a doula, but I have gotten to watch a lot of doulas as a photographer, and they're so incredible. watching them inform their clients, even in the moment. If your client has a certain birth plan and they want to change it or something comes up, your doula has the ability to sit down with you and say, okay, let's talk about this. Let's talk about these options. Let's take a beat and let's figure this out. And then I don't think women really have bad birth experiences because of the experience so much as because they so often feel like they had no say. And I think that that's a big part of having a doula is she helps put the knowledge in your hands so that you can have a say. And even in whatever system you're in, you obviously have the choices that you have. But if you get to make those choices, it can make all the difference versus feeling like them being thrown on you.
Yeah. No, that is really good. So I like to end my show with one question, and that is if you could speak one piece of empowering wisdom into the hearts of the mothers listening, what would that be?
God is sovereign and He is good. And also manage your expectations in all things, in birth, in marriage, in motherhood, because you are a much happier person when you go through your life thinking, how can I serve versus how can I be served?
That is so powerful. And Jenna, I just want to thank you so much for coming on Her Birth, Her Story.
Thank you so much for having me.
That is such a word. Thank you so much, Jenna, for sharing your wisdom and just your heart and love for the Lord and just your birth work and birth experiences. I know that this is empowering so many women. So if you are in the Memphis, Tennessee area and are looking for a birth photographer, make sure that you reach out to her. Her Instagram is in the show notes. But Jenna, thank you again. If the story inspired you or encouraged you in any way, please share it with another mama who needs to hear it. If you haven't already, please like, rate, review, and subscribe to our channel so that you can hear more stories like this. This helps us get to our goal of reaching as many moms as we possibly can. As always, remember, this is your body, your baby, and your birth. We are reclaiming birth one story at a time.